thought I'd be typing this during my honeymoon. Most people are sipping cocktails by the pool. I'm here sipping sweet, satisfying revenge. Honestly, it's better than the resort drinks. Now, before we go further, no, I don't have a Reddit account. My husband does, but he didn't want this link to his main. Apparently, this story is too nuclear even for his karma farm. His words, not mine. So here I am, writing this long tale of how my family tried to turn my wedding into my sister's pity parade, and how my husband and I made them fund their own humiliation. But first, some background. Because this level of dysfunction doesn't happen overnight, it's a lifelong recipe of favoritism, delusion, and one golden child sister who believed the sun rose and set just for her. Ever since I could remember, my parents loved my sister more. And I don't mean subtle little things. I mean blatant, slap-you-in-the-face favoritism. If she accused me of something, I got punished. If I accused her, they laughed. Even when there was proof, they found a way to scold me too, as if fairness was optional and blame the younger one was a family rule. Birthdays? My cakes were always her favorite flavor. Outings? Always what she wanted. My parents denied it every time, of course. Gaslighting was their love language. As kids, she was the princess. I was the practice child. She grew up entitled, spoiled, and frankly, unbearable. I was just background noise. Things got worse when we became teenagers. Somewhere along the way, her few friends disappeared, probably realizing she was awful company, and she decided that was my fault. Suddenly, every ounce of her frustration, every bit of her bitterness, landed squarely on me. And my parents? They enabled her like it was a full-time job. When I made friends, they'd stop me from going out. Your sister says those kids aren't good influences. Or, why can't you spend time with family like your sister? Translation, you can't have a life if she doesn't. The only reason I didn't go completely insane was because of my cousins. They were my escape, my lifeline. Until one day, Kid me blurted out to them that I wasn't allowed to have friends because my sister didn't have any. Then came the boyfriends. My poor, doomed teenage boyfriends. Every guy I dated, she tried to steal. Every single one. One time, my boyfriend told me she flirted with him in skimpy clothes, trash-talking me. I believed him instantly. Not just because he told me, but because, well, my sister isn't exactly subtle or charming. Let's just say her personality and flirting skills matched her self-awareness. Non-existent. But of course, she told my parents the opposite, that he hit on her. Guess who they believed? That relationship ended fast. Then it happened again. And again. Each time, my parents blamed me. Apparently, I had bad judgment. By the time I finished high school, my sister had more freedom, more money, more everything. My curfews were strict, hers non-existent. Whenever I pointed it out, they said, "She's older." Funny how that excuse vanished when I reached her age and still got treated like a prisoner. Then came college. When my sister graduated, she got a celebration worthy of a royal coronation. My parents paid her full tuition, at a mediocre college, mind you, but you'd think she got into Harvard the way they bragged. When my turn came, my mom dropped the bomb. "We're paying for your sister's college, so we can't afford yours. Maybe later. You should work first. Oh, and if I wanted to live at home, I'd have to pay rent." I remember nodding calmly and saying, "Okay." It threw her off. See, I'd already planned for this. I knew they'd find an excuse not to support me. So, while my sister partied through school, I studied my way into a full scholarship. Not Ivy League, but solid, and it was mine. When I announced it, publicly, online, and tagged them thanking them for their support, they couldn't back out without looking terrible in front of family. For once, I had the upper hand. College was the first time I could actually breathe. No more curfews, no more guilt trips. No more listening to my sister whine about imaginary injustices while my parents nodded along like she was the second coming of Einstein. It was quiet, peaceful, and mine. For the first time, I wasn't the other daughter. I was just me. I made friends, real ones, people who didn't need me to dim my light to make them feel brighter. I started figuring out who I actually was beneath all the resentment and exhaustion. Turns out, I'm kind of funny when I'm not constantly being emotionally mugged. Of course, I still had to deal with my family on holidays. Every visit home was like stepping into a psychological war zone. My sister had dropped out of college by then, something my parents glossed over like it was no big deal. They blamed bad professors and poor program quality, not her inability to wake up before noon. Meanwhile, she landed a job at my mom's company, which she only got because, of course, mommy pulled strings. But the narrative at home was, she's so talented they begged her to join. Yeah, sure. And I'm the Queen of England. At that point, I kept my visits short. My parents still saw me as the family screw-up, despite, being the only one with a scholarship. But I'd stopped caring. Distance was bliss. Every text from them was background noise. And then, in the middle of this beautiful period of peace and newfound self-worth, I met him. My husband. Back then, just a guy with a lopsided grin and a dangerous sense of humor. The kind of man who sees a mess and says, "Let's burn it down and start fresh." We met at a mutual friend's get-together, and within 10 minutes, I realized I'd met someone who wasn't afraid of conflict. That was new for me. I was a chronic peacemaker, the kind of person who apologized for existing. He was the opposite. He thrived on calling out nonsense, and the moment I mentioned my family, he leaned forward, eyes sparkling, and said, "Please tell me they're the type who would hate me. I love a challenge." Reader, I married him, but not before learning that he was also a Reddit fanatic. He devoured every revenge and karma story like it was gospel. So when I started telling cue ominous music, because of course my parents wanted to meet the man stealing their daughter, my instincts told me it was a bad idea. I'd spent years healing from their nonsense, and here I was about to toss my sanity back into the lion's den. But my husband was all in. He looked like a kid about to open Christmas presents. He even bought a small recording device, just in case my sister tried something. "This," he said, "is my Super Bowl." I tried to warn him that my family didn't operate on normal logic. He just patted my hand and said, "Perfect. I don't either." So he went to meet them, alone. He came back 2 hours later, wide-eyed and practically vibrating with excitement. "Babe," he said, "you won't believe what they just proposed." And that's when I learned that my family had officially gone off the deep end. According to my husband, who, by the way, had the entire thing recorded, my parents and sister had sat him down to discuss a family matter. They said they were willing to pay for our wedding. I know, sounds generous, right? Except there was a catch. A really big, utterly deranged, brain-melting catch. They would only pay for the wedding if my sister could walk down the aisle first, in a wedding dress. Let that sink in. They wanted her to play bride at my own wedding. Apparently, since she was older and still single, it wasn't fair for me to marry first. So naturally, the solution was to let her experience walking down the aisle, at my venue, in my moment, before me, with pictures, and a cake, and everything. My husband swears he short-circuited for a good 30 seconds. Then, instead of blowing up, he decided to do something far worse. He smiled and said, "Let me think about it." When he told me this, I thought he was joking. I laughed until I saw the recording. Then, I didn't know whether to cry or throw my laptop across the room. Even for them, this was a new level of audacity. They had spent my entire life making me feel small, but this? They wanted to literally replace me at my own wedding. For a few minutes, I just sat there in stunned silence. Then I started laughing. Hard. Because suddenly, it all clicked. When my husband said, "They think they're planning your wedding, but they're really funding our revenge," I thought he was joking. Spoiler, he wasn't. That man built a spreadsheet. No, seriously. Color-coded tabs, budget breakdowns, fake vendor lists. I married the petty accountant of my dreams. And together, we plotted the kind of poetic payback you only see on late-night Reddit scrolls. We decided to play along. Let them believe they were in charge. Let them gush about how our eldest deserves her moment too. Because the more control they thought they had, the more rope they'd give themselves. First step? Pretend to agree. My husband called my parents and said, all cheerful, "We think it's such a unique idea. Why don't you take the reins? You can handle the planning, venue, decor, catering. We'll just show up and look pretty." The silence on the other end was chef's kiss satisfying. You could hear my sister's smug grin through the phone. They thought they'd won, and from that day on, they turned into full-time wedding dictators. Every phone call began with, "We've decided," or "Your sister thought." They picked a ballroom instead of our simple venue. They upgraded the catering. They hired a string quartet. They even added floral arches. 3 of them. My husband and I kept nodding, smiling, and quietly redirecting every single vendor contract into our names. Why? Because we were paying small deposits ourselves, just enough to make the vendors treat us as the legal clients. Meanwhile, my parents were footing the big payments, non-refundable ones, of course. Every time Mom sent money, my husband sent her a thank you text. He's a genius at weaponized politeness. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Smith. You're really making this day unforgettable." She had no idea how unforgettable. Meanwhile, my sister started acting like a celebrity. She called it our wedding. She bought a white gown, plunging neckline, glitter, a train long enough to carpet the parking lot. When I pointed out that brides usually wear white, she smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, don't worry, yours can be ivory. That's close enough." I just grinned back and said, "Sure thing," because nothing is scarier than the calm before petty vengeance. The guest list was the next battle, but then came the moment that almost broke my composure. The ceremony plan. Apparently, my sister wanted to walk first, say a few words, and then step aside gracefully. Gracefully. As in, hijack the wedding and pretend it was generosity. Even my father said, "It'll be symbolic. She's giving you her blessing." My blessing. From her. Right. And I'm the Virgin Mary handing out holy water at Starbucks. At this point, we could have blown the whole thing up. But we didn't. Because our revenge wasn't ready yet. We needed timing. So we smiled, agreed, and kept feeding the delusion. Weeks rolled by. Dress fittings, cake tastings, photographer meetings, all coordinated by my family, but finalized quietly by us. We even convinced them to let us handle the printing of the invitations, which meant we could tweak the wording ever so slightly. The formal invites they approved read, "You are cordially invited to the wedding of my name and husband's name." Perfectly normal. But the version that went out to the guests said, "You are invited to witness the wedding of my name and husband's name, generously hosted by her family in honor of both daughters." That tiny phrase, "in honor of both daughters," was my husband's idea. It looked sweet, harmless, until the big day when people would interpret it exactly the way we wanted. And then came the masterstroke, the slideshow. Every wedding has one, right? Childhood photos, growing up, couple moments. My sister insisted on approving it. She demanded her own section, so people understand how close we are. So my husband built a slideshow with music and subtle narration, mostly wholesome with some sibling pictures. What she didn't know was that halfway through, it would switch to our version. Let's just say he'd found all the best childhood gems, her tantrums, her cringe teenage music videos, her old social media posts declaring she'd never settle for less than a billionaire, all sourced from her own public profiles, set to dramatic violin music. We didn't alter or fake anything, just contextualized it. By the time the slideshow ended, every guest would have a crystal clear picture of who the princess really was. Finally, the week of the wedding arrived. My parents were buzzing like they'd just produced the royal gala of the year. They'd spent a ridiculous amount, close to my annual salary at the time. Every time they boasted about their generosity, my husband and I just exchanged tiny, knowing smiles. 2 nights before the wedding, I got the message from my sister. "Hey, just confirming. I'll go first down the aisle, then you come in after, okay?" I replied, "Wouldn't have it any other way." Because, oh, we were ready. We had every vendor briefed, every cue timed, every word in the officiant's script planned to perfection. Even the photographer knew the real shot list. Document everything. My husband joked that we should rent popcorn machines. Honestly, if there'd been room, I might have. The night before the ceremony, my mom called to remind me, again, that this was about family unity and showing grace. I agreed sweetly, hung up, and turned to my husband. He said, "Tomorrow's not a wedding. It's a documentary." And that's exactly what it became. If weddings are supposed to start with butterflies, mine started with fireworks, the emotional kind. By the time I stepped into the venue that morning, the place looked like a floral explosion. My parents had spared no expense. The air smelled like roses and self-congratulation. My sister was already there, twirling in her sparkling white gown, acting like she owned the place. She gave me a pity smile and said, "Don't be nervous. You'll still look cute next to me." I bit my tongue so hard I almost tasted blood, smiled sweetly, and said, "Thanks for warming up the aisle." Guests began trickling in, coworkers, cousins, neighbors, everyone buzzing, whispering, craning to see the bride. Which one, though? That was about to get very interesting. When the music started, my sister floated forward, bouquet in hand, doing her best impression of a royal procession. Cameras flashed. People clapped politely, though you could already feel the confusion ripple through the crowd. Why was she walking first? She reached the altar, gave a delicate spin, and stood there like a pageant winner waiting for her crown. And then, silence. The music stopped. Our officiant, a family friend who was fully briefed, and said, loud enough for the back rows to hear, "Thank you, everyone, for joining us today to celebrate the marriage of my name and husband's name, graciously hosted by her family in honor of both daughters." There it was, that perfect, ambiguous line from the invitation. The guests glanced at each other, puzzled smiles spreading. My sister's confident grin wobbled. Then, the second piece of music started. A new melody. Calm, bright, unmistakably bridal. The doors reopened, and in I walked, in a gown that shimmered gold in the light. Not white, not ivory, something completely my own. The crowd erupted in genuine applause. My husband's eyes found mine, and that smile, that "we did it" smile, hit me right in the chest. When I reached the altar, my sister stepped aside automatically, still unsure what to do. The officiant continued smoothly, never missing a beat. "Today we gather to witness a marriage built on love, honesty, and partnership." And then the transition hit. Upbeat music, teenage photos, the greatest hits of our shared youth. Clips of my sister's old talent show performances, her dramatic diary quotes, those infamous "I'm destined for luxury" posts she'd made public years ago. The guests laughed. Not meanly, but the kind of light, genuine laughter you can't fake. My husband had captioned the section, "Every family has its star. Thank you for shining bright, sister's name." It was flawless. Nobody felt attacked. Nobody was insulted. But the message landed. This wasn't her day. By the time the music faded back into our couple photos, she'd quietly slipped out of the spotlight, pretending to fix her dress. At the reception, my parents tried to regain control. My mom gave a toast about the strength of family and sisterhood. I responded with my own, all smiles, thanking my parents for funding a day we'll never forget. Laughter the world! A few knowing looks from the guests who'd put the pieces together. When it was over, my sister barely said goodbye. My parents looked torn between pride and embarrassment. And me? I danced all night, barefoot, finally free. The next morning, our phones blew up with messages. "Wait, was your sister part of the ceremony? What a twist! Loved how unique it was." Someone even wrote, "Funniest wedding I've ever seen." And the best part? Every single bill had already been paid. A week later, my parents called, demanding to know why people kept joking about the rehearsal bride. I told them calmly, maybe they misunderstood. Next time, try clearer communication. They haven't brought up money or favoritism since. My sister moved cities a few months later, apparently starting fresh. And me? I'm sipping coffee with my husband, finally able to laugh about the whole thing. He still calls it the wedding heist. I call it closure, the kind that sparkles better than any diamond. A few weeks after the wedding, life settled into that soft quiet that follows a really good storm. My husband and I went on our trip, logged off social media, and let the whole thing fade naturally. Every now and then, someone from my hometown would message, "Your wedding looked fun." Fun. That's one word for it. My parents have since adopted a very new vocabulary: boundaries. They still send polite holiday texts, but the days of guilt-tripping and favoritism are over. I think the combination of public awkwardness and paying the final bill cured them faster than therapy ever could. As for my sister, she's living in another city now, posting motivational quotes about finding your own path. Good for her. Sincerely. Maybe, for the first time, she's learning what life looks like when she isn't the main character in someone else's story. And me? I learned that revenge doesn't have to be cruel. It can be quiet, smart, and served with a smile. You don't always have to yell to make a point. Sometimes you just let people reveal themselves, hand them the microphone, and watch them improvise their own downfall. I used to think forgiveness meant pretending everything was fine. Now I know forgiveness sometimes means walking away with peace and letting the universe handle the irony. So if anyone out there has a golden child sibling, a controlling family, or just a long history of being underestimated, remember this: you don't need to scream to be heard. Sometimes the loudest statement is just living well, laughing freely, and letting the truth speak for itself. Anyway, that's my story. The tale of how my family tried to make my sister the bride at my wedding and ended up sponsoring their own wake-up call.